Something that I've been thinking about a little bit more lately is training age, because it came up a little bit in our summer programming where we had, or we wanted to teach our athletes how to single leg deadlift, and it came up in July when they had only been starting with us for like end of May, beginning of June, or I guess full of June, and we went from a group size of about 4 to 10. And all of a sudden, trying to teach 10 kids how to single leg deadlift became like impossible. So we swapped that out, but like we've sort of rejigged the progression of the actual program. But talk to me a little bit more about training age and like how important that is to not only your programming, but also like finding what's appropriate for a given athlete.
That's a very good question. That's something I struggled with a lot, even while I was at Coastal, especially with individual athletes. And it's like, oh, why don't we do this or do this? And it's like, well, we can just keep progressing them along and along. And I spoke to Coach Damian Fisher, who's the head strength coach at Western Washington, and he explained to me that you need to program appropriately for their training age, or you're actually skipping and missing out on important gains. So if you've never trained before, and I throw I don't know, some complex like post-activation potentiation where you're deadlifting and then jumping and doing sprints and all that stuff right away, that will work because you've never trained before. But what happens then is I've jumped you to like level 3 and I missed out on level 2 and level 1. So I go to level 3, then okay, you've maxed out on that. Okay, let's go to level 4, max out level 5, and after level 5, there's pretty much nothing else. So after level 5, you're only maybe in your 2nd or 3rd year, but I have nowhere else to go. And then instead of being like, oh, we've never tried just squatting, that actually doesn't work because you've actually jumped those levels. So what you actually need to do is spend time, actually the maximum amount of time you can with like body weight, and then the maximum amount of time you can with dumbbells, and then add barbells. Because that way you, number one, build movement competency, and then you can build strength on top of that. But if you start to jump levels too quick, you basically cut off the gains and then you can't go back to that level. For example, I've been training for quite a few years. I can't just bodyweight squat and make gains anymore. I wish I could, but I can't. Yeah, but I can't. So for me, I kind of have to try new things and try all these different advanced techniques. But because I've done those basic level things, whereas for an athlete, if you start them at those complex things, you can't go back and try to maximize those gains, and so they're almost lost in a sense.
Right.
And also, if you start them on more complex things, then obviously injury risk goes up, safety concerns, all those things. Yeah. So my recommendation with training age is like always think of like what their training age is and like take a step back. Because if I go to you and say, hey, how long have you been training? And you're like, oh, like 1 or 2 years. Probably 6 months. If like athletes will always lie, oh yeah, no, I can squat. Oh yeah, I can do this. Yeah. And then the correct response we learned from precision nutrition is show me. Yeah. Show me your squat. Show me your this. Andrew Hemming, who was one of the my head strength coach when I was here, used to say like if an athlete tells you they've got like a 300-pound squat, it's probably 200. 300 would be their half squat. They just have nobody coaching their depth. So one thing you want to do is have athletes prove to you what they can do. And then, like I said, almost take it a step down, because you need to maximize those lower level gains in order to keep going to the next level. Because if you just jump a bunch, there's a certain ceiling and you can only go so high. So you need to make sure you start lower, build up. Otherwise, you run out of room and you can't, like I said, you can't go back to body weight stuff and try to get better at it.
I've heard it said another way that you're basically trying to eat your cake before you've actually baked it. Yeah. Or you're trying to ice your cake before it's actually been baked. So it's you're reaching your ceiling a little bit too early, potentially, right? And that concept is very fascinating.